Now recording is in progress. On behalf of Congregation Beth Elohim in Acton, I want to extend the warmest of welcomes to our 20th annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. Special thanks to Naaseh, our social justice group led by our chair, Sarah Coletti. Um, so much love and so much appreciation go to Sal, who welcomed us, who has been keeping the fire burning for this program for 20 years and keeping the flame burning for social justice for many, many more years than that. I'll let him decide if he wants to tell you how many years it's been. We are super excited to welcome who I am really grateful to call Honorable Rachel Rollins, our United States Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. It was too long in coming, and I'm sorry to say how hard that was to get there, but I know we are grateful to God and to the forces of good who made that happen. Just a little note from the show. I'm going to give some introductory words. I promise to keep them less than your normal sermon. Our cantor, our extraordinary cantor, our musical clergy, Sarah Spirer, will share some music for the occasion. Sarah Coletti, who is the head of NASA, will introduce the Honorable Rachel Rollins. We remember today, this evening, the life, and we mourn the death of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. King, as you know, dedicated his life and gave his life for an idea, the idea that every human life is sacred, that we all count, that we all get a vote, that we all get a voice. All of us created, in the words of Genesis, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Now, I'm sure you've noticed in the United States, we love to talk about God. We say under God in our Pledge of Allegiance. We put in God we trust on our money. And we love a rousing chorus of God Bless America. It just so happens that the reading in the Jewish calendar this week is Parshat Yitro from the book of Exodus and includes what we call in Hebrew Aseret HaDibrot. You probably know it as the Ten Commandments. And because Americans love talking about God, some of us want to display the Ten Commandments in schools, on government buildings, in courthouses. But you wonder sometimes if those folks have actually read the Ten Commandments. For instance, a dictate we read in Hebrew, Lo tisa et shem Adonai Elohecha lashav. Don't take God's name in vain. But isn't that what we do in this country every day? When we face that flag and put our hands on our hearts and invoke one nation under God, but fly the same flag over courthouses and prisons devoted to the incarceration of millions of black folks, don't we take God's name in vain? When we put in God we trust on our money, but tolerate a profane economy that discriminates against black friends and family in employment, in banking, in housing, don't we take God's name in vain? And when we sing God Bless America, but remain silent while black citizens are poisoned by incinerators in their neighborhood and denied health care that white Americans take for granted, and while the forces of injustice, again, at this very moment, undertake a systematic campaign to disenfranchise black voters, don't we take God's name in vain? When our actions reveal our words to be lies, we forfeit the right to ask for God's blessing. Of course, lies can confuse mere mortals, but in the words of the great Jewish teacher Nechama Leibovitz, the liar should remember there is a judge above whom he cannot deceive. That judge, our God, hears our words and just as assuredly sees our actions. How could the judge of all the earth perceive this gap between our pious words and our unjust deeds, a gap that has persisted for 4 centuries, and not take note? I'll close with words about this gap from Reverend King himself. For the good of America, it is necessary to refute the idea that the dominant ideology in our country, even today, is freedom and equality, and that racism is just an occasional departure from the norm on the part of a few bigoted extremists. If America does not respond creatively to the challenge to banish racism, King continued, some future historian will have to say that a great civilization died because it lacked the soul and commitment to make justice a reality for all men. May we be inspired by Reverend King's life to close the gap between rhetoric and reality, to turn evil into good, to reform injustice into righteousness, to transform our nation's vile lies into a dazzling, brilliant truth, that we cherish all God's children as holy, as sacred, as beautiful. King Nihiratzon, may it be God's will, may it be our will. Cantor Spirer.
Thank you so much to Rabbi Mike for your words, and to Sal once again, and to Sarah for all that you do. And thank you to everybody who's here tonight. It's so good to see everybody. So it has been said that the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was a modern day prophet. I'd like to share a song that's based on the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, a beloved 18th and 19th century rabbi who, like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, taught and embodied these truths: respect for all people and for the earth, forgiveness and a great love for humanity, and for the one of whom we are all a part. We'll follow the song with a short prayer. You are the one, for this I pray, that I may have the strength to be alone, to see the world, to stand among the trees and all the living things, that I may stand alone and offer prayers and talk to you. You are the one to whom I do belong, and I'll sing my song, I'll sing my soul to you, and give you all that's in my heart. May all the foliage of the fields, all grasses, trees, and plants awaken us to my comingness, I pray, and send their lives into my words of prayer, so that my speech, my thoughts, and my prayers will be made whole through the spirit of all growing things. And we know that everything is one, because we know that everything is you. You are the one, for this I pray. I ask you, God, to hear my words that pour out from my heart. I stand before you. I, like water, lift my hands to you in prayer. So grant me strength, and grant me strength to be alone. You are the one to whom I do belong, and I'll sing my song, I'll sing my soul to you, and give you all that's in my heart. A prayer for our country. For all the people of the United States of America to have the good of the whole in our hearts and in our minds, in our hands, in our mouths, and in ourselves. We are free to express the good and to give it a home. a place here on earth for protection and safety, love, respect, and cooperation for all. It's time for a new friendship, unlike we've seen or known before, between all of humanity, and for the purging of old stories and prejudices and beliefs and hurts and mistruths, for hatred to be dissolved, and for self-destructive behavior to be dissolved, and for disconnection to be dissolved, and for love to be placed in the hearts of the leaders and the people. Thank you so much.
Amen.
Say amen too. Amen.
So I am Sarah Coletti, Chair of Na'aseh, the social justice group of Beth Elohim. Na'aseh is Hebrew for we will act. We act on issues of racial justice, climate and environmental issues, immigrant justice, and on food and poverty issues. This is the 20th annual Martin Luther King Day event that has been held in Acton. Na'aseh has hosted for the last few years, but plenty of other community groups and congregations participate, co-host, and attend this event. As I looked at the list of registrants, I noted plenty of people who serve our community as elected officials, as board and committee members, and as engaged citizens. Thank you all for attending tonight, and thank you for staying engaged and interested in the work of making our community a better place for all. Today's talk will be recorded and made available on Congregation Beth Elohim's website and on Acton TV. If you have questions for our speaker, you may submit them in the chat room, and our Zoom hosts will ask during the Q&A period as many respectful questions as we can get to. Today, we are honored to welcome the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, Rachel Rollins. Attorney Rollins' career has been one of service to Massachusetts. She has used her skills and legal expertise to make our area safer and more responsive to its residents. She's been a persistent advocate for criminal justice reform and has succeeded in making positive change while withstanding aggressive criticism and controversy. Today is the one-week anniversary of her swearing in as U.S. Attorney. She is the first Black woman to hold that position. She won the election to the office of District Attorney of Suffolk County, running on a campaign promising to focus resources on the most violent and serious crimes facing the community and on strengthening ties between community and law enforcement. She delivered on those promises, and the results have been laudable in the reduction of homicides and violent crime in Boston. She has served as legal counsel to the Massachusetts Port Authority, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, and the MBTA. She was an assistant U.S. attorney and has served as an attorney for the National Labor Relations Board. She holds a master's of law from Georgetown University, a legal degree from Northeastern University, and an undergraduate degree from UMass Amherst. We heartily welcome Rachel Rollins.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that lovely introduction. It is an honor to be with all of you here this evening. And it has been, as Sarah said, quite a week for me. As you heard, I was sworn in on Monday, my father's 74th birthday, as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. So it has been an exciting week. I'm proud to say that this appointment is a first and makes me the first Black woman to ever serve as the United States Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. We are one of the 2 oldest United States Attorney's offices in the history of the United States of America. So this is a really wonderful big deal, right? So, and it hit home for me on Monday as I was walking the halls of the U.S. Attorney's Office with my parents and my daughter, who is 17, my 2 nieces, who I'm the guardian of, who are 12 and 8. And the hallway is lined, the long hallway, with all of the past U.S. attorneys dating back to the late 1700s, 1789. And as we moved down that hallway, my 8-year-old niece asked, "Where are all the women?" And I thought, wow, I'm like, keep walking. There are 2, and I'm going to be the second one after that. So we have to give a shout out to Carmen Ortiz, who was the first woman to ever have this job. She was a supervisor of mine, a leader, a mentor that I look up to. So we have to make sure we pay homage to her as well. And before I begin, I want to give a huge thank you to Sal Lopez for the invitation to be with you guys this evening. It's really gratifying that on this day that honors the legacy of Dr. King, and at the conclusion of this week for me, that I'm here with you. So I'm blessed. As the elected district attorney of Suffolk County, I met many of you guys through the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, GBIO, and the ACLU's What a Difference a DA Makes campaign. I am here to thank those of you who participated in that work. Your efforts absolutely contributed to my election, 100%, and the success that I had as the elected district attorney. And I would not be the U.S. attorney had I not been the DA. So thank you very much for that. And I'm also here because the values and ethos of Beth Elohim speak to me. I admire this congregation's moral leadership and commitment, not just on Martin Luther King Day, but on every day. As a community, you have included in your core values the principles of repairing the world, justice, guarding the earth, and loving the stranger. The courage, compassion, and humility that underlie those values are at the essence of Dr. King's work and what I would like to speak with you guys about today. So as district attorney, back on July 1st, a few months ago, I stood with community members and Robert Treston of the ADL on a stage at a more somber occasion. We stood side by side with Jewish leaders and other community members and elected officials at a vigil on Brighton Common after Rabbi Shlomo Naginsky was stabbed multiple times in front of a Jewish day school. That incident happened just days after Nathan Allen murdered David Green and Ramona Cooper while looking at horrifically anti-Semitic websites on his phone. And I stood firmly and called those incidents exactly what they were: hate crimes. Such acts of violence and hate are prompted and have prompted also, though, we need to look at a significant outpouring of love and support. The DA's office that I had the honor and privilege of being a part of was part of that support network, letting impacted communities know that the office stood firmly with them and will be with them through the healing process and will protect every single individual's ability to show up 100% authentically as who they are without fear of hate or violence. Sadly, just 2 days ago, congregants, including the rabbi of Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, were taken hostage during services that were being live streamed. Fortunately, and due to the exceptional work of law enforcement, as well as the members of that congregation, the hostages were freed unharmed. The mere fact that this domestic terrorist entered a house of worship with the intent to harm is a stark reminder of the world we live in today. It is a reminder of how important the partnership is between law enforcement and the faith community. And as U.S. Attorney now, I want you to hear directly from me that I have every intention of continuing and in fact broadening our partnership. my toolbox just got a whole lot bigger. As the U.S. Attorney, I now have both criminal and civil options. The U.S. Attorney's Office has one of the most robust civil rights units in the United States of America. And in the coming weeks, I will be meeting with my staff to discuss how we can continue to support you and be accessible to you. So again, I am delighted to be here among congregants who have demonstrated deep moral courage and conviction and action to speak to you about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But I'm going to speak to you about it a little bit differently. And I'm going to use a name you might not be familiar with. Today, I want to talk to you about Tu Thao. And you might be thinking, I've never heard that name. Is that, what is that? What do those words mean? Who is Tu Thao? Tu Thao is the police officer who was Derek Chauvin's partner on the day Chauvin murdered George Floyd. In the videos of that murder, you can see Tu Thao standing next to the police car. Behind his right shoulder, Chauvin is slowly squeezing the life out of George Floyd. Now, Tu Thao never put a hand on Mr. Floyd. His job was strictly crowd control. Tu Thao faced the crowd, his feet in a wide stance, his arms next to his side. He was wearing a crisp police uniform with insignia on his right arm, radio slung over his shoulder, gun in his holster, black gloves on his hands. In most of the footage, he's stoic, unmoving. The crowd is begging and pleading for him to intervene. Every so often, he takes a step forward and barks an order for the people to stand back. He rarely looks behind him, not even when the paramedics arrive on site. So much of our focus has been on Chauvin, and he absolutely deserves to be condemned as someone who dishonored his badge and took a life. But it's easy to condemn Chauvin. Not enough of our attention has been paid to Tu Thao, because Tu Thao, I think, makes all of us uncomfortable in our own self-recognition. Likely none of us, or I certainly hope none of us, are capable of being the person with the knee on the neck of a human being who is vulnerable, scared, powerless, squeezing the very life out of a human body. But many of us, if we're honest, may see a bit of ourselves reflected in those unblinking eyes of Tu Thao. I think many of us, whether in law enforcement or any other profession, are capable of being Tu Thao. We look the other way. We tell ourselves what's done is done, or that was somebody else's bad decision, not ours. What can we do about that now? It's just too much to deal with. We hide behind our institutions, our uniforms, our credentials, our fancy degrees, our commitment to precedent and norms and process, maybe even our just sheer exhaustion of just not wanting to have to deal with another thing. All the while, what we are doing is crowd control, providing the imprimatur of law to terrible injustice. What I committed to do most stridently as the elected district attorney was ensuring that as prosecutors, we were never going to be Tu Thao. In every single profession, mistakes are made, and law enforcement, both police and prosecutors, are no different. But prosecutors are not just every other profession. We have a higher ethical obligation. In fact, the rules of professional conduct have a special section for prosecutors. Those rules say, and I quote, "A prosecutor has the responsibility of a minister of justice and not simply that of just an advocate." So as a minister of justice, we cannot just look away from past injustice. We must ensure that justice is done in every single proceeding. That includes looking back at past convictions and sentences and taking every step to remedy unlawful, unconstitutional, and unethical actions and to prevent them from ever happening again. It was in this spirit that as the elected district attorney, I created Suffolk County's first in the nation Integrity Review Bureau that goes far beyond the work of a regular conviction integrity unit that many other offices around the country have seen. In Integrity Review, there were 4 pillars conviction integrity, which you understand, basically looks back to see whether there was unjust, unconstitutional, or criminal action done obtaining the conviction. Sentencing integrity, which looks at disparities and outcomes from similar individuals that committed crimes, a more culpable and a less culpable individual, where the less culpable might get a higher sentence than the more culpable. Case integrity, which is an automatic instant review in real time, so we don't have to wait 30 or 40 years to see if we made a mistake, that the executive team is notified immediately of certain outcomes in a case so that we can see whether harm has happened immediately. And then the LEAD database, the Law Enforcement Automatic Discovery Database, which is our Brady list. And that does not mean Tom Brady. It's a United States Supreme Court case of United States versus Brady that requires us to turn over exculpatory information. The work of the Integrity Review Bureau involves cases and bad actors from decades ago. I'd like to say every profession needs an audit function. And I think a lot of the problems that we find in the criminal legal system is the fact that we don't have one. During my tenure as DA, we had over 100 requests for the Integrity Review Bureau to look into cases. I am really happy to say that in the overwhelming majority of those cases, the Integrity Review Bureau found no cause for concern, which means that's a good thing, right? We got it right. The police, the prosecutor, the judge constitutionally, ethically, and justly arrested, charged, prosecuted, and sentenced the defendant. Now, they might not be happy with what happened, but it was sound, constitutional, and constitutional. But in 14 or 15 of those cases, we discovered that convictions were secured with misconduct, unconstitutional and unethical actions, or even criminal behavior, and we agreed as the prosecution in the Commonwealth to vacate or overturn some of those cases. And as a result, more than 400 years in a carceral facility have been overturned, essentially. Those individuals have now been freed or released or are pending release. That's 400 years. Some of those cases you guys will know very well. The Netflix documentary Trial 4, for example, told the story of Sean Ellis, who was convicted for the murder of Boston Police Detective John Mulligan. Several Boston police officers, detectives investigated that homicide, but they themselves were involved in an extensive criminal enterprise with the murder victim, Detective Mulligan. Those living detectives inserted themselves throughout that murder investigation to avoid bringing their own criminality to light. And further, the prosecution, the office I now lead, failed to properly turn over significant exculpatory evidence. 25 years after Sean Ellis's third trial, I, as the district attorney of Suffolk County, admitted that this unconstitutional, unethical, and criminal conduct severely infected the entire trial, and ultimately agreed to vacate and enter what's called a null pros on the last remaining conviction against Sean Ellis. Now, of course, guys, there's no Netflix documentary for those other cases. But in each of those cases, there was a person who spent decades incarcerated for a crime they likely didn't commit, or as a result of a trial that was fundamentally flawed. But it is really important to hear there is also a family whose lives, family members whose lives were torn apart because they suffered not only the trauma of losing their loved one to a homicide and never getting the accountability that they were promised, or receiving a phone call to say that that conviction is now being undone because of unconstitutional or unethical behavior. We have to recognize that when we allow ourselves to become too tau, when we look the other way, when we lack the moral courage to confront injustice done by others who wear our uniforms or carry our credentials or look like us, we perpetuate and compound the initial injustice. No, we did not commit the homicide or engage in the domestic violence or the sexual assault or say the anti-Semitic or racist words. Maybe we ourselves did not hide evidence or fail to turn over exculpatory evidence to the defense. We didn't do any of that. But if we turn away from our knowledge of those things or the fact that they just happened, we are signaling that these type of wrongs or actions don't matter, or that the people the wrongs or actions are happening to don't deserve peace and justice. We cannot be Tou Tao. In Deuteronomy, it is said, justice, justice, you shall pursue. I am sure that in the Jewish tradition, there are many explanations for why justice is repeated twice in that directive. I read it as an address to those of us in law enforcement and related professions who are supposed to stand for justice. That first justice, in that sentence, I think is a call to action. It is a reminder that we must not simply, we are not simply justice because we have a badge or took an oath. We must instead make a choice to pursue justice actively, intently, each and every day. Today, on Martin Luther King Day, I turn that directive on to you. What are you doing as someone who thinks of yourself as a moral person, a just person, to pursue justice actively, intently, each and every day? How do you or we not become Tou Tao? In his final book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, that was published posthumously in late 1968, Dr. King writes, the practical cost of change for the nation up to this point has been cheap. The limited reforms have been obtained at bargain rates. For the vast majority of white Americans, the first phase of the civil rights movement had been a struggle to treat the Negro with the degree of decency, not of equality. White America was ready to demand that the Negro should be spared the lash of brutality and coarse degradation, but it had never been truly committed to helping him out of poverty, exploitation, or all forms of discrimination. There is not even a common language when the term equality is used. Negro and white have a fundamentally different definition. Negroes have proceeded from a premise that equality means what it says, and they have taken white Americans at their word when they talk of it as an objective. But most whites in America in 1967, including many persons of goodwill, proceed from a premise that equality is a loose expression for improvement. Equality is a loose expression for improvement. What a brilliant observation by the late Dr. King in 1967. In my time as DA, I learned that compromise is often a tactic, a popular talking point to dilute and stall justice. Real change is hard. It's uncomfortable. It requires us to care more about equality and equity than our own egos, our own stature, our own privilege. It requires us to abandon the idea that good people cannot support bad institutions, because they can and they do, because we can and we do. We have to own it. That is the only way to change it. So what can we do? What must we do? We can't wait. Patience is the method of the privileged. We keep hearing, just wait, change will come, or be patient, reform is slow. I like to say change is like power. It is never given, it's taken. Dr. King, who is often quoted as the model for how to protest by those who support the status quo, literally titled one of his books, Why Change Can't Wait. It's easy for us to say, just wait, when we are the ones that are not experiencing the injustice. The urgency is real, and the stakes can be life and death. Dr. King and the entire King family remind us that change is not only possible, it's hard work. And we need to do that work to demand more of those of us who say we are allies. And I like to say, you know, I like the word ally, but allies usually whisper something to you when you're alone or send a text when you're sitting at home by yourself. What I'm asking you to be is unindicted co-conspirators. We need to step our game up to boldly stand with each other. I said unindicted now, right? But I want us to be better than allies with each other. Even though anti-Semitic hate crimes might not impact me and the people I love, if I don't stand up with the ferocity and the conviction that I would if it were a crime against women or a crime against Black people or a crime against, I'm 50 now, the elderly, or some community that I am involved in, I am not worth the title that I have, quite frankly. So I am imploring all of us to be allies or unindicted co-conspirators with each other. That's my challenge to you. If you don't want to be Tou Thao, then don't do crowd control. Turn your face and look. Don't look away from what is hard to watch. Make yourself uncomfortable by putting yourself in the position of being uncomfortable. I want you to engage. Don't stand unmoving in the face of injustice. You need to intervene, you need to organize, and you need to vote. And ultimately, I will say that when we do that, we will all be better, right? We have seen some horrific things happening in our country, and we've seen a divide that at times seems unbearable. But when we all come together and see the similarities that we have, I believe we can make profound change. And I remind us that it is often darkest right before the light, and we have some very good things coming in the future. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, Rabbi Mike, for anticipating my remarks in your, I'm told to say, your Yom Kippur sermon. And thank you for everyone for being here tonight and for your commitment to answering the call. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Honorable Rollins. My name is Matt. I'll be helping to facilitate any questions, so please send in your questions via the chat. Only the co-host will be able to see the questions, and so we will convey them in the order that they come in and possibly group them if there are some similar questions. So please send in your questions via the chat function.
So while that's happening, Matt,
Absolutely, go ahead.
just want to again thank. I called you honorable. Is that the right term?
You're just supposed to call me Rachel, please. But yes, it's funny. I think technically U.S. attorneys are called the honorable, which I'm like, who are you talking to? Please just call me Rachel. That is fine. But yes, if you meet other U.S. attorneys, call them the honorable so-and-so. But I'd like you to please refer to me just as Rachel. That will be perfectly fine.
Well, I will then call you Rachel, even though it feels a little odd. I love your teaching. Patience is the method of the privileged. Beautiful way with words. You can come and be on our bima and our pulpit anytime. I want to ask while questions are coming in, there's certain things that it's obvious when they're, segregation that's du jour is obvious, racial covenants and housing are obvious. For those of us who we suspect that there's discrimination going on in housing and banking, and we know that it's happened, but you can't point to it. I mean, we think maybe the police officers are giving more attention to the Black kids than the white kids. We hear anecdotal stuff. What does a community like ours do when we can't point to it, right? We can't say, oh, there it is in writing, but we have a feeling it's going on, and our friends of color or our family members are telling us that it's going on. How do we partner with your office maybe? What's our next step?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are great questions. And I like to remind people, I want to be there, of course, when there are horrible hate crimes that happen. But you know when else I want to be there? When you're celebrating, right? I think we have to be partners with each other in the good. We have to become far more culturally competent. What was great was, ways that we can learn. My niece is 12 and goes to Boston Latin School. She's been to her first bat mitzvah. And I went to Buckingham, Brown and Nichols and was very angry that I didn't get to have, I went to millions of bat mitzvahs, bar mitzvahs, and was very angry with my parents that I didn't have one, but was really blessed that I felt like I was learning about so many beautiful traditions in different cultures and religions, et cetera. I think there are ways that not just in times of hate and harm, but in times of joy and, like struggle and strength, just to sort of explain to each other all of our traditions, I think are ways that we can build community so that later when we see things that are happening, it's not so hard for us to maybe say something because we have extended ourselves or made ourselves a little uncomfortable in learning something new. And I like to, I'm a former athlete, very former, but I speak to UMass Amherst, a women's lacrosse team all the time. I was fortunate enough to have a scholarship to go to college, and the team is not particularly diverse. And in the throes of all of this awfulness last year, right, with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and it felt like you couldn't blink without seeing some mass shooting or horrible. I had an open communication with a virtually all-white women's lacrosse team to say, you're going to ask me any questions you feel comfortable asking. There's nothing you can say to me that will offend me, nothing. But I want you to feel comfortable asking me questions. Even, Kyle Rittenhouse, right? We talked about that trial. I want to hear why you believe it's, maybe something that you think that I wouldn't agree with what you're saying. And we're going to go, point, counterpoint, and we're going to talk about what different people's opinions might be. And it's almost, if we can feel comfortable and have safe spaces where we can ask questions without feeling like we're going to be vilified or judged, I think that's when we are going to really start making important movement, right, forward after, because remember, Rabbi, change never happens when we're comfortable. It just doesn't, right? And so we have to be comfortable doing that. So, and if you see it, maybe say something or ask, or, sit still for a minute and say, well, that's interesting. Why did they stop Rachel and ask her when the 7 people before her in line didn't get asked and the 2 people after her in line didn't either? And they all appear to be either male or younger. There's something else, but maybe, maybe sit and wait before you say something, but also maybe ask me, like, is everything okay? I noticed that this happened. And if I'm receptive to hearing what you're saying, maybe we can come up with a solution together. But I think there's a lot of different ways that we can start, taking a baby step forward. Because maybe, Rabbi, there are people that wouldn't feel comfortable. It has nothing to do with them not wanting, that's just not who they are as a person, but you can help in other ways, right? Maybe you don't want to confront immediately, but you could write something, right? Or write a complaint to say, yesterday I witnessed something that made me uncomfortable. If there's an anonymous way you can do that, that matters too when you do it, but you need to make sure what you're doing makes you feel comfortable.
Thank you.
And the questions, Rabbi, can be anything about the office. It doesn't have to be about what I'm speaking about. One of the, I think, most important questions is like, what's the difference between the district attorney, the U.S. attorney, the attorney general of the state? We can talk about that, or I can let you guys get back to everything you're doing. If there aren't questions, that's fine, no matter what.
We have plenty of questions, actually.
Oh, you do? Okay, I didn't see any in the chat.
I just was jumping in case Matt was collecting them, and he's an expert at this. So
go ahead.
I'll get out of the way.
That was perfect because I did want to give Rabbi Mike an opportunity. The first question is a general question from Ann Budner. And the question is, what are your highest priorities for Massachusetts?
Thank you, Anne. So we are going to continue to be the leader that we already have been in national security, in healthcare fraud, in white collar crime. Massachusetts really set the stage for those specific types of investigations and prosecutions, even, 1 to 2 decades ago. But I'd like under my administration for us to be far more, so we're going to continue doing that, but to now be far more involved in human trafficking, drug trafficking, and gun trafficking, right? So when we think about places like Mass Ave and Melnia Cass, a lot of the harm that is happening there is because there are human traffickers and drug traffickers that are just going to that quarter mile by quarter mile radius and literally pumping harm into those communities. I know it sounds as if it's something different coming out of my mouth. When I say as the federal government, I want to take those individuals and prosecute them federally because there are more significant ramifications, quite frankly, on the federal side. But when you are human trafficking, meaning taking individuals and, using them as an asset, quite frankly, and reaping the benefit of the harm. Many of the times when people are human trafficked, they are also in the throes of addiction, mental health issues, and other things. I believe those predators that are preying on vulnerable individuals require additional time and attention. And those are violent, serious crimes that I am most interested in focusing a little more of the federal attention on. And then also civil rights, quite frankly. I'm really proud that this office I now lead under Carmen Ortiz, the woman I talked to you about, created about 10 years ago something called CRET, the Civil Rights Enforcement Team. That's civil rights and then criminal civil rights, right? So civil rights are, discrimination, as we heard from Rabbi Mike, in housing, in education, in banking, right? In policing, right? But there's also cross burnings that happen. The hate crime we charged with the rabbi in Brighton, right? Against the individual that stabbed him 9 times. And thank God he was fortunate enough to defend himself and save his life, right? With the help of law enforcement, but certainly was able to defend himself heroically there. So I think we're going to also be looking at the rise in domestic terrorism and focusing on maybe bringing federal attention to some of those hate crimes.
Thank you, Rachel. We have a lot of questions about police reform. And I'm going to group a couple of them. What is your opinion about defund the police? Also, can you talk a little bit about police culture and how to improve it? I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so defund the police is a really inflammatory term, right? I have never used those words myself. I can't explain I won't speak for the people who use those words. We need the police. I can tell you, many of you, if you've ever seen me on TV prior to becoming the U.S. Attorney, I guarantee you it was standing at a homicide scene. I was standing there 2 Christmases ago, awful, at a garage in Roxbury when a mother threw her 2 young children off a garage. I'm usually at a horrific scene and then jumped to her own death. We need the police at those scenes, right? We need experienced members of law enforcement to either help us solve the crime or de-escalate situations. So let me have a hard stop to say we absolutely need the police when there are the violent, serious crimes happening. I think, honestly, though, if you speak to any police officer, they would admit that they're being asked to do far too much in their job, right? So the police are now social workers, teachers, addiction specialists, right? Like they are showing up at situations that sadly can shift in an instant from a mental health situation to a violent encounter. But what we need to think about, and I think Boston actually does this quite well, is maybe having also social workers show up when it's a call from a family member to say, me, Rachel Rollins, my brother has mental health issues. He's acting erratically. He hasn't hurt us at all, but we're growing more and more concerned about his well-being. You know, there were circumstances where things like that happened and the mother tried to call the hospital and they said, no, we don't do that. You have to call 911. She tried to call just an ambulance. No, we won't just show up. You need to call 911. And sometimes with the police arriving, it sort of escalates the feelings of what's happening. But defund the police is not something I would use as a term. I think we need to, like any situation, we need oversight. You know, if you have a $400 million budget, right, I would hope that there was somebody looking at what are we doing? Is it working? Are we spending money in the right places or not? And that doesn't mean, I think, and I'm part of law enforcement, I think law enforcement has this ability that if you ever question what we're doing, we call you anti-police or anti-law enforcement, when in fact, you just want to make sure that the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent appropriately. So that's with respect to defund the police. And I need to work on this a little better too. I think, remember guys, the media very rarely says, Officer Wendy Parker did a great job today. Look at how amazing she is. She helped people that didn't look like her. She worked an extra hour and a half without being paid for it. She smiled at everyone she encountered and she went above and beyond. Like, where's the story in that, right? We only hear about Officer Wendy Parker, and I'm sorry, Wendy, I just saw your name there, right? You did everything great, right? But we only hear about Officer Wendy Parker when she does something wrong, right? Or when, you know, close your eyes and think about the last 10 times you've seen the police on the news, it's a white officer shooting an unarmed black or brown person. And that is awful when it happens. But if we look at the percentages of when that actually happens and when it doesn't, it's a lower percentage that's happening than, you know, the overwhelming number of members of law enforcement that are actually culturally competent, really want to help people when they do their job every day, and don't show up and hurt anyone or do anything criminally or unconstitutionally at all. We have to get out of the culture though, and this goes to police culture, of looking the other way and not wanting to sort of call out our partners. What's great about the Post Commission, some of the legislation that just has been passed by our legislature, or OPAT, which is a City of Boston executive order, is now there are reporting requirements, right? Like with police officers, where if I see Sarah Coletti doing something and I'm on duty with her, and it is, you know, her body worn camera shows that she did something and I was there and I didn't intervene, I can be disciplined for that. So now there are reporting requirements, right? That are helpful, I think. And what's important is on the Post Commission, there are 3 police slots on that 9-person Post Commission, but it is majority community, which is also really interesting to see. So, you know, I think police culture is changing. I think what we have to do better is really hold up the gold standard police departments that are doing it right. And nobody's perfect, but to say, for example, you know, even under the Trump administration, there was one pattern or practice finding against a police department in the entire United States of America by the Trump administration. Where was it, ladies and gentlemen? Springfield, Massachusetts, narcotics unit. Pattern or practice of Fourth Amendment violations, Springfield, Massachusetts, not Baltimore, not Chicago, not Ferguson, not LA, not New York, Springfield, Massachusetts. So I inherited that as the US attorney. So what am I going to do? I'm going to say to Commissioner Greg Long in Boston, and Chief Kai is in Chelsea, who's the chief of he's the major city's chief president of all the police departments in Massachusetts, and say, who are our gold standard police departments that Springfield needs to be emulating? And then that does multiple things. It has my face saying something positive about law enforcement, while I'm also holding a law enforcement department accountable. So I think that's the way we change police culture, is we have great police officers that are involved with the community in coming up with solutions. And then we need bold leadership to implement them. We can't keep pushing things off. We have to make the change.
Thank you. Here's another question. This is a single question. How can prosecutors overcome unconscious bias that results in racially different convictions and sentencing?
Excellent question. So remember, we all have implicit bias, me included, right? Like, we all grew up watching the same television, hearing the same sort of, and seeing the same stereotypes sort of pumped into us through the educations we received, who our family members were, where we worshiped, what we saw. So this is not a white and black thing. I think what I try to do with respect to implicit bias is hopefully, ask the right questions, right? Like a good lawyer would, right? So for example, at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I've only been in the job for a week, but we are proud that with some of our white collar crimes, there has been a very high rate of release for COVID-19. So when we think about where is the worst possible place you could be at the height of the sort of global pandemic when it first started, right? Carceral facilities, like cruise ships, Navy ships, right? Places where you can't do the two things you are required to do in order to not contract COVID: practice social distancing and extreme hygiene. So when I hear from the office I now lead that we're really proud that we have not opposed many COVID stay requests from prisoners in our white collar crimes, that is good. I then ask, are we doing the same in our immigration cases, or in our cases where it's called OCDETF, Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, where the majority of the individuals that we are prosecuting, not all, but overwhelmingly, are Dominican or Cape Verdean. The defendants look very different. And if we are serious about releasing due to potential contraction of COVID-19 and the significant public health public health risk that there could be with COVID-19. Yes, we always have to balance public safety, but ultimately I want to look at this group of defendants looks a certain way, and this group of defendants overwhelmingly looks a certain way. Are there different outcomes? Now, some of the things that we look at, just so you understand, when somebody has to be released, is, are you being released? Where are you being released to? Is there a location you are being released to? We don't want to just release you back to a community where you don't have any ties or a home. And often with white collar criminal defendants, there's no issue about that. They're being released back to their $3 million condo in the seaport, right? Or their home in Wellesley, or they'll be vacationing in Nantucket at one of their 6 homes there. Our population of defendants in other instances don't have the same release plans as others. And we have to think and balance public health and public safety. And I need to be clear, maybe the answer for certain of those defendants is still going to be no, but what we have to do is at least be aware of the perception of what that looks like, right? And so, we have to talk about it. We can't be silent, right, about what some of these perceptions are. And then remember, I am often, and again, I am a Black woman, but I am a biracial Black woman. My father is an Irish white man, and my mom is her family is from Barbados. but I'm not uncomfortable talking about race as much as a lot of other people are. And I inherited an office where I have approximately 125, maybe 130 prosecutors. 92 or 93 of them are on the criminal side, criminal assistant United States attorneys, 0 Black AUSAs in the office, 0 Black criminal AUSAs in the office. So that doesn't mean that they're racist. That doesn't mean that they aren't culturally competent or exceptional at their job. They are exceptional at their job, I promise you. But can absolutely be a perception if you are arrested and the agent that arrests you, the prosecutor that prosecutes you, the federal defender you get, your probation officer, the magistrate judge, the clerk, and the Article 3 judge, if none of them look like you and you don't see a single person with melanin in your entire process, you can believe the system is rigged against you. All I'm saying is we have to work on what the perception is, and we have to make sure we're talking about if we can't keep saying we can't find qualified people of color. We just can't do it. We can't find qualified women. We can't find qualified, individuals with language capacity. We can't find qualified, qualified people that are in the LGBTQ community, right? Or AAPI community. What are we actually doing to find them, right? Like, are we having the U.S. attorney go out and speak at any location that will have me? Of course we are, right? Are we making sure that can we accommodate if there's a person who needs an accommodation with respect to ability and movement? Is our office ADA compliant? Like, those are the ways we need to start thinking about how we can overcome implicit bias. When I ask people to come to my office, am I thoughtful about who I bring? Is everyone 23 years old and a member of Mensa? Or am I bringing people that are actually have some lived experience and a little bit of gray hair, right? Or who are criminal defense attorneys, right? Like, why aren't you guys teaching us about Brady in addition to prosecutors? Why aren't we getting a couple retired judges to come in and talk to us? Hey, what if we had somebody who served 10 years federal time and is now running a nonprofit, right? To show that, you know what? Yes, I did touch the criminal justice system. I paid my debt to society. And now I'm an upstanding member of this community, paying taxes, living a positive, upbeat life and helping the very community that I potentially harmed. Those are all the ways I think we can combat implicit bias. It has to be, we have to be relentless, and it has to be coming from every single angle. It just can't be, here, read this one little article on implicit bias that I emailed you along with the 400 other emails you got today, and let's go back to doing everything the way we do it all the time.
All right, thank you. We have time, I think, for a couple more questions. First one is going to be harder than the second one. This question has come up by several people. Voting rights is a big subject these days, as we all know. In your opinion, do the Massachusetts practices stand up, or are there things we need to work on here closer to home? And does your office have a role to play in unfair districting, i.e. gerrymandering? So that's the first question. And we will have to make sure we leave some time for the final question.
Okay, so yes, I mean, voting rights are huge, right? And we are waiting to see whether an act will be passed by our Congress now. I think what's going to be a really interesting election potentially is for our Secretary of State, right? And remember, we had what we thought was going to be a contentious battle, right? When a Boston City Councilor, Zakem, ran against the sitting Secretary of State. And I think at the time, the Secretary of State said he only was going to run or this one last time, and this would be his last term. It'll be interesting to see whether we can improve some of our functions in Massachusetts about voting, right? And can you register to vote earlier? You know, what are the requirements of voting? How are we notifying people of their right to vote? There's a huge piece going on right now, Matt, about when you are incarcerated, you can vote. If you are not serving time for a felony, a lot of people don't know that, right? Number one. Number two, what are we doing in the Suffolk County House of Corrections? And this is mind blowing, but I'm just going to explain this to you because a lot of people are like, use the word jail for everything. There's jail and prison, and jail is usually the House of Corrections. Those are run by sheriffs who are elected to 6-year terms. Don't ask me why. There are 14 sheriffs and there are only 11 DAs, and we both have counties. I can't do the math for you, but I promise you the numbers are right. Okay, so Sheriff Tompkins is the sheriff of Suffolk County. I am not Kevin Hayden is the district attorney of Suffolk County right now. And anyone arrested in Suffolk County goes to either Nashua Street or South Bay, which is what Sheriff Tompkins runs, right, as the sheriff. He oversees both of those. What are we doing to make sure that there are notifications in all of the houses of corrections when elections happen, right? That people actually know that they are only precluded from voting when they are serving time for a felony. Now, also, we need to make sure, you know, the second they get out, my understanding is even when you're on probation, you're no longer serving the actual sentence. So what are we doing the instant these individuals come out to make sure that they know that they have the right to vote, right? And then some people are never, I can't tell you how many people when I was knocking doors as the DA literally said, like, I'm never voting for a DA. Like a guy actually with an ankle bracelet on said, like, why would I ever vote for DA? You know, I'm not, this is a religious ceremony, so I'm not going to tell you the words that he used, but I looked back at him and said, really? So you don't think that having somebody that understands or has had a family member with the same, you know, jewelry, I called it, you are wearing on your ankle right now. I have a brother who came to an event of mine with an ankle bracelet on. And I just said, like, I love you, Jonathan, but why? Why did you have to come with, but you know, we can't choose our family all the time. But anyways, I just said, listen, you need somebody who understands that even when you're doing that, if you're showing up at work, the importance of what that is, understanding that I've experienced that if you work construction and you're, you know, somewhere in a sewer, that your ankle bracelet might not have a, might not be pinging at the time and you'd be violated for that. Like, do you have people with lived experience in this role? And that doesn't mean that you aren't going to go to jail, sir. But what that means is that I at least look at you as somebody who could be a member of my family. And is it only exclusively what you are in this moment? I look at your life as a mosaic, not a Polaroid snapshot, right? Now, whether he voted for me or not, I don't know, but I know that it was a contentious conversation. And later, you know, some people that had heard it had said they appreciated the fact that there was at least a spirited discussion, right? And what I like to tell people is, you know, when we don't vote, right, it's hard to complain after the fact, right? But I do think it's important that elected officials, and when we see people like Julia Mejia, who won with 1 vote for the Boston City Council, or other people that are changing the, you know, changing the narrative of what elections can look like Michelle Wu, you know, and others that we've seen. I think it's really important that we think about voting rights and think about voting in a very different way. And absolutely my office on the civil rights side should be deeply involved if we see anything happening with respect to voting, not just on voting day, which we partnered with the FBI. There was the day, one of the polls there, I think it was an emotionally disturbed person. I don't think it was technically like, you know, malicious regarding burning one of the tolling locations, right, where you can hand in your vote. I'm missing my words right now, but it was a booth like that was open 24 hours he set a fire inside of it. We looked into that closely to make sure it wasn't like a malicious act. But ultimately, yes, this office I lead can be involved, as can Attorney General Maura Healey, which she was actively involved in stuff, and the DAs as well, with federal, state, and local partnership.
Right, I think we have time for one last question, and then we'll have to wrap it up with Sarah or Rabbi Mike. And it is this: as you start this challenging new journey, did you choose a new mantra that keeps you going? And would you care to share it for inspiration?
Ooh. You know, it's funny. I used to have the old mantra that I have is make them tell you no. And I use that all the time for campaigning. You know, I wonder, that certainly helped me getting the old job I had. And I think the fight that I had as DA is a little different than some of the fights I might see as US attorney. You know, I think what I'd like to say is, I wanna be thoughtful and unwavering. How about that? Right? I think one of the things I'm most proud of myself on is that in the old job, I felt like I had to make decisions really quickly because we had 25 to 30,000 cases. Things were coming like drinking out of a fire hydrant, right? Pushback by every single person, because I had the autonomy to say, hey, we're not going to do it the way that we have been, right? We have a 67% recidivism rate for these nonviolent, non-serious crimes. If that were a car manufacturer that failed 67% of the time, you wouldn't be making cars anymore. Why is it when law enforcement fails? Because recidivism is failure, right? And you could say, oh, well, but it's bad people. Okay, bad people that overwhelmingly are in DCF custody, DYS custody. Whose fault is that? Oh, well, they have terrible parents. Okay, they had terrible parents when they were 3 years old. The state raised them, right? And if the state raised them and they are failing, we owe them the responsibility of some wraparound services somehow. So I think I was able to change things, right? Like, or be really firm with what I was going to do. I think it's going to be a little bit more nuanced with the federal government, right? Because there's not as much autonomy, but I want to be thoughtful and unwavering is what I would like, is when I'm ready to make the decision after, you know, I've hopefully surrounded myself with a team of rivals, gotten all the input I need, and then we're going to make the best decision that is most ethical and just and thoughtful and inclusive moving forward. My children are being very bad behind me, so I'm trying to like fake smile and pretend that they're encroaching on us. So we have like 30 more seconds, Matt, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's good that you mentioned your children, because one of the questions was about your children, and how hopeful they are. I apologize. There are a lot of other questions and we are not able to get to them. So I think I will turn it over to Sarah Coletti or Rabbi Mike for final words.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing with us tonight, because I am completely convinced that you're going to make a difference at the U.S. attorney level, as you have, and as a district attorney. So I am so impressed with everything you've said today. And I do want to, I think that we're going to put up a thank you slide for the people who helped put this on, and for our allies. We've been working hard with our co-sponsors to put this together, and we're trying to be allies to one another, just like you recommended. So thank you so much, Rachel.
My pleasure.
And as before people leave, as we thank Rachel and Sarah again, NAASEC continues to work on issues of equity, and we have a racial justice team as well. And it wasn't just allies; it was unindicted co-conspirators, right? So we want to make good trouble, holy in John Lewis's words, right? May his memory be for a blessing. Holy chutzpah, we can call it.
We can say goodbye to everybody.
We're deeply grateful for your service and for your inspiration tonight. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you all.
What do you think?